Hello friends, welcome once again to Rick's Garage. If you're familiar with my channel, you'll know that I've done a lot of videos on brake work. Today I'd like to address some questions I've been getting in my comments section. Before I get started, there's a very important question I wish to address. It's from one of my viewers. The viewer asks, how long after I do my brakes should I be getting a burning smell or seeing smoke coming from the wheel? This is very important. You should never get any sort of burning smell or see any sort of smoke coming from your wheel after doing the brakes. If you do indeed smell any sort of burning or see smoke coming from your rotor, something is very wrong. Another question I get quite frequently is, how do I know my caliper is any good? Should I discard it and replace it, or can I reuse it? What I want to talk about right now is, how do you decide if you need to replace your calipers or you can reuse them? Many of you probably have been to one of those big box repair centers, and you've taken advantage of one of those free brake inspections. You may well have experienced sticker shock when they give you the quote. It's not uncommon these days to be given a price of $800, $900, maybe even $1,000 to do the brakes on your vehicle. The reason for this is these big box tire store repair centers are going to replace everything, whether you need it or not. For one thing, replacing everything with new parts is easier for them, and the more things they can sell you, the more money they make. But the biggest reason is they don't want you coming back with a problem. The whole idea of doing the brakes yourself is to save money. So you can decide which parts you wish to replace and which parts you want to reuse. The most common part that gets reused is the caliper itself. So in this video, I want to talk a little bit about what you should look for when making the decision to reuse your caliper. First of all, before you begin work on the car, before you remove the wheels, carefully raise the vehicle. With the vehicle in neutral, have someone pump the brakes a few times. Then see if the wheel turns freely. If it does, that's kind of a good sign. Once you've removed the caliper, have a good look at it. Make sure the boot appears to be in good condition. No cracks, tears. Next, make sure there's no seepage around the boot, no brake fluid leaking. Now, if your wheel is not binding, and the caliper looks to be in good shape, pay attention to it as you wind the piston back in. Make sure it moves in freely and easily. If it starts to bind or gets harder to wind back in, then there could be a problem with the caliper. So if the wheel's not binding to begin with, your caliper winds in freely and easily, and it looks to be in good condition, you might want to take the chance and reuse it. The risk in doing so is that the caliper could get stuck at a later time. If your brake fluid has never been flushed, over time it can cause the piston to corrode and get pitted. As your brakes wear, your piston will extend outward. As the piston moves outward to keep the brakes in adjustment, the possibility exists that if there is indeed corrosion and pitting on the piston, when it comes in contact with the seal, the caliper will get stuck. So friends, if you do indeed decide to reuse your old calipers, in the weeks to come, watch for any sign of the caliper sticking. This would include the car pulling to one side or the other when you apply the brakes, any sort of burning smell, smoke coming from the wheel. Watch for all these things. Now, backtracking a little bit, going back to before we took the car apart, Remember, I suggested having someone pump the brakes and give the wheel a little spin to see if it's binding. If it is indeed binding, it does not necessarily mean that the caliper is bad. One component that's largely neglected and can also cause the wheel to bind is the brake hose itself. The brake hose is braided to give it strength. It has a rubber-like outer skin and also a rubber-like inner core. The brake fluid travels through this inner core. Sometimes the inner core can get cracked or broken and act like a check valve. It'll allow the brake fluid to go through to apply the brakes, but won't allow it to return to the master cylinder reservoir. Thereby, the brakes get stuck. It's a fairly rare occurrence, but it does happen. I've experienced this firsthand myself. There's a very easy way to check if your brake hose is causing the wheel to bind. Simply open the bleeder nut. If the wheel suddenly frees up, then you know the brake hose was the problem. Another possible cause of your wheel binding is the bracket that holds the caliper. Sometimes the slide pins can get corroded and get stuck in place. So once you got the caliper off, make sure your slide pins are well lubricated and moving back and forth easily. Another possibility is the pads themselves can become corroded and stuck on the bracket, such as the bracket I have on the bench here. You can see me hitting the pads with a hammer and they won't budge. Another thing I want to mention is contamination. If you decide to replace your rotor, the manufacturer puts a coating on it to prevent rust. This must be thoroughly cleaned or it'll contaminate your brakes. Also, if you manage to spill any kind of fluid or get grease marks, finger marks on the rotor, this can cause contamination. What you'll experience if your brakes are contaminated is as you come to the stop, you may feel a shuddering just before the car comes to a stop, and you may actually see smoking. So it's very important that you be careful not to contaminate the brakes with finger marks, brake fluid, or the coating that the manufacturer uses to prevent rust. So the last thing I want to say here is do not put saving money ahead of safety. When in doubt, replace the part. So I want to thank you all for watching Rick's Garage once again, and we'll see you next time.